Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Aaron Block. I'm the managing partner and co-founder of Metaprop, one of the leading early stage real estate technology venture capital firms based usually in New York City. And I say usually because it's a whole new world. And we're very excited to be here talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is communication requirements for a flexible return to work environment. And it's a topic that's at the tip of many people's tongues right now, and one that we're happy to provide some really interesting insights into from a very distinguished group of panelists here. I'll give their names quickly, and then I'll identify you one by one to give a little bit more about yourselves. I'll prompt you with a question, but if you can give a wave here to kick us off. From Nextivity, we've got Timothy Lewis. Welcome, Timothy.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to be.
Thanks for being here. From HQO, we have Tyler Vermette. Tyler.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate you coming. And from VergeSense, we have Chris Keene.
Hey, all. Good to see you.
Welcome, Chris. One thing we learned in the green room before starting the panel is that Chris has been working remotely for nearly 8 years. So he's going to teach us. He's putting on a masterclass of how to handle remote work and its implications around flexibility for this return to work world that our vaccine distribution is allowing today. So I think it's important to know who we have here to get kicked off so that the audience, viewers have some perspective. And I thought perhaps we could spend a little time starting with you, Chris, and VergeSense. Do you mind telling us a little bit about who you are, a little bit about what you do, and how you help landlords and key stakeholders, please?
Yeah, happy to. So VergeSense is an IoT provider, and essentially what we have is area sensors for measuring occupancy in physical spaces. So we've got two different versions of our sensors. Essentially, one is battery powered and wireless. It's mounted up in the ceiling. The other one is a power over Ethernet device that is cabled. In any case, both of them will count the number of people that are in a conference room, or how many people are sitting at a bank of desks down to the individual desk level, or even open space if you have some couches or collab areas you might have set up because people may be working differently when they return in those collab areas and want to measure how many people are there. We'll do that as well. In addition to that, we'll take the data. So we produce it obviously with those sensor devices, but then we also aggregate it up in the cloud in an analytics platform so that you can kind of hone in on your floor plans and take a look at, well, how many people have been using this space today or last week or last year, and have that kind of trend lining of seeing how many people are coming into those different spots.
That's terrific, Chris. Thank you very much. Tyler, will you tell us a little bit about you and a little bit more about HQO, please, and what you do for landlords and other key stakeholders in the return to work environment?
Absolutely. Nice to see everyone who joined today. And my name is Tyler Vermette. I head up the sales team across North America here at HQO. So for those of you unfamiliar with HQO, we are a tenant experience platform that's really the world's first end-to-end operating system for commercial real estate landlords and operators. So if we think about what that means, there's really a couple different areas for which the platform touches. So on the front end, on the tenant side, we have the mobile device in the form of an app. And then we also have a desktop version that is the remote control for the tenant and the 99% of the population at the building. So bringing together everything from how they get to the building, how they access the building, booking different resources while at the building, ordering food, conference rooms, all of the different experience and everything that goes into your ultimate day-to-day as a tenant. So if we think of the three different buckets that we touch for a landlord, one would be communication. So push notifications to tenants, email, real-time alerts within that application going to the tenant base. And then secondly, a bucket for utility. So all the different providers and technologies, whether that be built-in functionality in the platform or best in breed third party. So if we think about, access control through HID or proxy or OpenPath, then visitor registration, those different verticals. And then lastly, the experience. So as we all sit home and we come back to office, we're going to expect a very different experience as we get there. So how can we help arm our landlords and our partners to provide an elevated experience as people come back to office? So then everyone says, what's the ROI? So that big question is, one, for tenants on the front end, a frictionless experience of bringing everything together in your day-to-day in one place, which we are very used to in our homes with Alexa and Google Play and a lot of these different things that we've been accustomed to using. And then for the landlord, how do you become more data-driven? How do you really start to think about taking all that data and how people use the building, what they like, what they don't like, and really thinking about retaining tenants, building different leasing cases, actually having a differentiator in market, and then ultimately, how do you start to inform the CapEx and the OpEx decisions you're making that really result in overall NOI? So that's where we're really focused on going and enabling our landlords holistically in the future.
Very interesting. Both of those are super clever, new cutting edge ways of enabling the key stakeholders in this ecosystem. And I think, Timothy and Nextivity, can you tell us a little bit about you and where you and Nextivity fit into this kind of return to the work environment?
Absolutely, Aaron. Thanks everyone for having me on this panel. And Timothy Lewis, I'm the VP of Channel Sales for Nextivity. We're a little San Diego-based company, about 15-20 minutes from the beach, and we're about 15 years old. We have offices in San Diego, UK, Spain, Australia, Singapore. We manufacture and develop the Selfie line of what we call smart cellular coverage products and solutions. We also, a little known fact, we actually design and manufacture our own chipset. So we're also a chipset manufacturer, okay? We put all of these incredible ingredients together in our line of products. Our chipset's called IntelliBoost. It's patented. We protect it. It allows us to bring a lot of intelligence to what we do. And what we actually do is we solve probably the toughest cellular coverage challenges, both inside the building, outside the building, and even in vehicles, okay? So our chipset, IntelliBoost, it's core to all of our products, all of our technologies. We have a particular line of products called Quatra, Q-U-A-T-R-A, Quatra. It's a very unique in-building wireless solution. It's what we call a hybrid DAS. We use it for a lot of opportunities within the enterprise in building cellular coverage, anywhere from 20,000 square feet up to 1 million square feet. We've got a revolutionary new way of doing what we do. Besides our chipset, we also use category cable versus coax, power over Ethernet. All of our products are remotely manageable. Our products are basically approved by over 200 mobile network operators in over 100 countries across the globe for use on their networks. The product is actually deployed. I'm going to say we have tens of millions of products deployed right now for enterprise customers, for mobility customers, and industrial customers. The product is unconditionally network safe. Again, we bring a lot of intelligence to the problem. So a Selfie product will actually bring computer-like intelligence into the problem of solving cellular coverage issues, okay? We also bring a lot of power, and because we're unconditionally network safe, meaning we cannot create interference in the carrier network at all, we are approved and endorsed by most every operator on the globe, and I think it's safe to say we're a popular choice, if not a preferred choice, for most in-building wireless integrators and customers alike.
Very interesting. And given the audience for today's event, I think a lot of what you have to share specifically around the backbone network and infrastructure that allows great solutions like Verge Sense and HQO to be as effective as they are will be very, very interesting to hear more about. Speaking of network and infrastructure here today, I thought, Tyler, we'd start with you. You're getting users of the app, guests of the occupier, of the employees in an office building, for example. I know you have kind of cellular and Wi-Fi in our previous discussions that are important for connectivity. I'd like to know from you, from a network and infrastructure perspective, for HQO to be at its best, how is 5G changing the world, and how do things work in this have to work environment from a network and infrastructure perspective?
Great question, Aaron. I think as we look at the different utility functions I mentioned that we're bringing into the experience from the front end, so you think about the different access control systems and those different areas where we're literally throwing our key cards in the trash, right? So everything sits on our device, it has to work. So that's the mandate from landlords, from our operators. You can't have a tenant who is not allowed into their suite or up the elevator or into the front door because there's a connectivity issue. So connectivity is of the utmost importance. Right now, I think where 5G will really become transformational is really as we move toward what a future state looks like. So we think more about wayfinding through buildings. That's ultimately a really big factor as to the connectivity and the speed that makes a big difference in that component. If we start to think about, how we look at some of the different mappings and graphs that we'll start to see of the floor plans and how those start to come to life through different illustration. A lot of that is much more enabled in a 5G environment than it is in the current state. So I think we're excited about a lot of the futuristic components that 5G will enable in an experience at speed, whereas you're not going to sit there and look at that spinning wheel of death, which we as a consumer-centric society with apps don't like to see.
The spinning wheel of death, is that the interstitial? That's everybody's worst nightmare around the world. Chris, I want to kick it to you for a second. When speaking of network and infrastructure, you've got these great sensors that have this, kind of simple hardware with this incredible software layer on top of it. Tell us about connectivity requirements for these sensors. How does it work inside of a building?
So there's essentially the network architecture depends on the type of device that you choose. So I had mentioned that we have a battery powered device and we have a power over Ethernet device. The battery powered device is much more complicated in how it works, but the connectivity is much more streamlined. So with a battery powered device, those devices all talk to each other. So imagine them all deployed across the floor for full coverage. They'll talk to each other via what's called a mesh network. We use a technology called WirePass. They talk to each other, eventually talk back to a gateway server, and then that gateway server will backhaul, as we call it, up to the cloud, all of the data that's coming from the sensors. And for that backhaul, you need either a cellular or a Wi-Fi or a LAN connection for that data to get up to the cloud. So with the dependency a lot of our clients have on having real-time data, which has become a really important thing with return to office and people coming back into these spaces, it's crucially important with the battery-powered devices, since you already have somewhat of a lag with that type of sensor. Since they're battery-powered, we have to be more cognizant of how often we're capturing data. You want to make sure that the data is backhauling up to the cloud as quickly as you can, so that you don't have any more lag in addition. The PoE sensors, those are much more real time. So since we don't have to be cognizant of the amount of power we're draining, since we're running those class 2, these are class 2 devices, you run the cable to the back of them and they drain around 5-6 watts worth of power. We can continually run these PoE devices all the time, and they'll communicate back through those Ethernet cords that are running into the back of them. So power and communication is normally through those Ethernet cables. But sometimes for certain client configurations, we may elect, as the client's preference, to push all of the communication not through the Ethernet cable, but through Wi-Fi. So in that case, it's vitally important for us to have a really strong Wi-Fi connection to be able to, again, get that data back up to the cloud. as fast as we can. So in our business, real time and just having really strong connections is vitally important. Otherwise, we're going to get missing data or lag times that are largely unacceptable, especially to enterprise clients.
Connectivity sounds really important for both VergeSense and HQO to remain effective in the return to work and office environment. Timothy, question for you. We've heard about LAN, we've heard about mesh networks, cellular, Wi-Fi, all these great kind of connectivity protocols and platforms. What's the network it takes to support great offerings like HQO and VergeSense? Can you tell us about the coverage required and the infrastructure required from your perspective? In particular, can you help us understand what is kind of the minimum requirement today that a landlord or a manager of an office building, for example, might need in order to support these types of emerging and successful technologies?
Yeah, happy to. Wow. So now we can go far and wide now if we really wanted to. So I'm going to rein this one in. But I'll say this, and this is like every time there's a new network, right? It creates a lot of excitement, right? Years and years ahead of even rollout, the excitement begins, right? And I think it also accelerates the adoption of cellular technologies, right? Cell phone, smartphone device, slick applications, and other technologies. I think LTE was probably the big network move for the industry. I think it actually enabled a lot of solutions to work that couldn't work over 3G. I'm going to say that probably LTE is responsible for making cellular connectivity inside a building almost critical. Let's say the fourth utility, right? I have to have, no longer a nice to have. And I think, companies, like VergeSense and HQO are perfect examples where you're capturing valuable data and you are immediately transmitting it to a cloud, right? Through sensors, cameras, there's a gateway involved. Generally speaking, it's always going to be a cellular connection. So it's absolutely imperative that the cellular connectivity is rock solid, right? And there's obvious reasons why cellular would be preferred over Wi-Fi, right? And other alternatives, right? So, what we do at Nextivity is we just enable all of this stuff to work. And here's either a little known fact or maybe it's a known fact now, but there was a time when people did not realize that cellular coverage really was very, very challenging inside of a building, okay? We just assumed that it worked everywhere. But as we started using it more and more and it became more ubiquitous, we realized that there are certain physical, mathematical, scientific restrictions on whether a cellular signal can penetrate a building. Now, if you throw into that the fact that commercial buildings that use a lot of brick, concrete, steel, energy efficient glass, all these things do a great job keeping in cool air and keeping in warm air, but they also keep out signals, right? So I think what's happened over the last maybe 5 years is we've seen probably a critical need to actually provide what we call cellular remediation inside these buildings. It's become imperative that property building owners can provide not only the 3 utilities, but they need to be able to provide rock solid cellular connectivity inside the building. And that's kind of where we come in, right? So here we are, we're still, and I believe LTE is going to be around for a very long time because it is a very solid network for what we're doing right now. But yes, 5G's here. We've been talking about it for a while. And what does it really mean? It means that you really need to understand it as a building owner planning for 5G, that there's, it's not just one thing. It's a variety of services. And there's sub 6 gigahertz, and then there's millimeter wave. Millimeter wave is fast. Data rates are incredible, but it's actually penetrates even less than LTE, right? So that's a consideration to actually be able to really utilize those data rates. We're gonna have to figure out a way to get that millimeter wave signal into the building. For right now, what we see rolling out.
Timothy, can I interrupt you for 1 second? So is
Absolutely.
that kind of like Back to the Future? The new technology is bringing us back to the problems that we used to have?
Yeah. Well, we have a saying at Nextivity that the cellular problem is a good problem to have if you're us, okay? Because it's not going to go away, and that's okay because again, we love our part as an enabler because there is amazing technology coming. I mean, look, the two other panelists are prime examples of what we're doing now in terms of just workplace planning and managing inefficiencies, and the ROIs are super strong. It's a no-brainer ROI. So we love our role. We can sit back and work closely with the operator, watch the rollouts. Because we're an engineering company and we do everything in-house, our own chipsets, our own antennas, our own software, our own cloud, our own plastics, we can pivot quickly, respond quickly, and we can come out with the next product probably much faster than a lot of our competitors can. So right now we're 5G ready. We're 5G ready for sub 6 gigahertz. You know, we can do 5G DSS, 5G NR, NSA, SA. These are what's being rolled out now in different markets by the operators. As an example, AT&T is going to refarm band 5 for some of this sub 6 gigahertz, and we're ready. And we're also going to be ready for millimeter wave. We're looking at CBRS. We're looking at everything that's out there. And it's actually becoming more challenging to keep up with all of it because it's just so much in terms of what's available now to the enterprise and to the building owner. But I think, that's the thing. We look at it as, the problem will never go away. We just need to be out there at the forefront with cutting edge technology. If we can figure out a way to solve the cellular coverage problem faster, easier, and less expensively than the rest of the competitors in our landscape, then we're going to continue to grow our business. And the exciting thing is we take pride in helping enable all these great technologies and getting them to market, right? And they are all pretty much based on cellular. The last thing I'll say about it is that besides the great solutions, we also are dealing with the fact that, LTE, I really feel, helped launch the BYOD concept. And everyone brings their devices to the office now, right? They all do. They use them to stay connected to home, stay connected to social, but they also use their own devices to conduct business and to even, have external business calls with customers, run business applications. So that BYOD part of it, along with the new solutions coming together, keeps driving it. And we're going to stay ready.
Yeah, that's very, very impressive. And I want to kick it back to Chris and thinking about integrations with other technologies and tools within the return to work world. Let's say I'm a landlord and I own an office building. Why should I care about making sure there's enough connectivity for VergeSense to be integrating? What's the risk to me if I don't make sure that the infrastructure exists to support all of those integration opportunities out there that puts everything together?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we're seeing is kind of this paradigm shift really at VergeSense where, up until about last year when COVID hit, primarily our core market was building occupiers, right? So people that were leasing space, trying to figure out, do I have too much? Do I not have enough? How can I optimize my seating ratios of number of people I'm assigning into these buildings? So it was mostly space planning exercises, right, around how the space was being used and how we could use it better or more efficiently. But with the pandemic, we've actually had a lot of interest and success with landlords because some of the landlords, especially the more progressive ones like the RXRs of the world, have said, if we outfit a lot of our spaces that are for tenants with technology like VergeSense, or we at least cable it so that we know a client could come in and immediately plug in some of these devices to know where people are and how they're using the space, we're going to have a lot more success renting that space out to tenants. So it's almost being used as kind of a tenant attraction mechanism. And then on the backside, of course, there's what the property management or landlord gets out of the deal as well, is they get a lot of metrics around specifically how is that space being used, especially in common areas. So are people using the gym? Are people using the cafe? Are people, going downstairs to view some sort of vendor you brought in for a presentation? Whatever it is, that's becoming very popular for landlords to start looking at, because those metrics are becoming critical. If there are landlords in certain markets who seem to be doing really well, whereas in other markets they're not doing that all that well, right? Those landlords want to figure out why. And if you have metrics around, okay, putting in these certain types of amenities because they're used heavily in these markets or for these groups of people or these types of companies, industries, whatever it is, then you have a much better data set to work from. So I think having the connectivity is just extremely important for clients, not only for VergeSense, but obviously for a system like HQO as well. Just making sure that people are always able to access that data, have it at their fingertips, and then also on the backside, I think you'll get some operational efficiencies for landlords as well as a result.
Yeah, some of that could drive NOI from the tenant perspective and from revenue perspective and from the cost perspective. It sounds like it's pretty important. Tyler, do you have a similar view? Can you give your perspective? If we can't get all of these integrated, if I don't spend the time and effort and money to make sure there's connectivity, what am I losing from an integrations perspective with HQO and its ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think about obviously connectivity being the core component to power, technology like VergeSense and how that flows into the value for a landlord in the back of HQOS, which is our headquarters platform, which asset managers and property managers have access to. It's where they'll start to look at the different analytics. So VergeSense would pull into the back of that platform. We'd have that analytics flow to say, where are people moving throughout the building? What's changed since people have come back from COVID? Do we have amenities that are being used that aren't being used? What can we change our strategy against? Then maybe we can start to go to those tenant companies who have lease renewals coming up and start to ask more questions around, what they want to see in the building. So if we can start to identify some of these trends a bit quicker, especially around retail. So obviously retail has struggled throughout the COVID pandemic. If we can start to understand a little bit more around what people, are using when they come back, what they're expecting to see when they come back, we can help to then position our landlords in a better place to support those retailers as well. And obviously back to the base foundational element of connectivity. How do you provide the best experience as quickly as possible? And then actually measure that data through those different partnerships.
Very interesting. Thank you, guys. That makes a lot of sense. Timothy, back to you. The question I have is, you explained to us about cellular, how important it is today. You talked a little bit about 5mm wave, 5G stuff in the future, and some of the challenges involved with that. But what does if you close your eyes and you think about the future of connectivity in an office building, what does it look like? Take us as far forward as you need to or you can, and paint that picture for us. What is the future, and how do folks like Tyler and Chris and their firms leverage that future?
Yeah, that's a great question. Try to be a visionary here, but obviously we see, let's go 3 years out where we see more 5G is ubiquitous at that point. There's actually going to be that same 3G, 4G LTE handoff period between LTE and 5G, and then eventually millimeter wave. I see the buildings becoming so intelligent. The term smart building will officially be kind of just a standard building, right? There will be buildings with sensors, cameras, and every type of remote enabled and monitored and managed device you could possibly think of. And I think the pandemic did probably accelerate this to a degree, is tracking people within a building. Well, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. And I think there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of reasons behind it. But I can see not only the tracking of the people or the occupants within the building, but just managing and your utilities, managing your space, being able to operate a building, lighting, temperature, security. We see it now, but it's not widely deployed. It's not completely, ubiquitous at this point. It will be. When this 5G network completely rolls out, and new technologies continue to ride that wave, you're going to see every single building, new buildings for sure to begin with, and then that'll actually probably migrate or ripple effect its way into existing buildings, and that'll be retro. And I think we're going to have a situation in 3 years where literally that building will basically be a living organism. It'll be like basically living and occupying inside of a computer. All of it's going to be cellular. It's all going to be built around cellular, which is going to be fantastic for companies in my space and for the operator. And it's going to be interesting to see just how many new technologies are going to pop up as a result. Because if you think about it, it really always has been a couple things that have kind of determined what the technologies are going to be. And the network speeds, data rates, throughput were primary, right? And then you look at the devices and you look at the battery life and you look at all that, you could come up with a case. All these things have to line up to be a perfect storm to really enable new technologies. I think we're there. Without a doubt, we're there. Connected buildings, smart buildings, things from the sci-fi movie, things
there.
you can imagine. Yeah.
Timothy, just a quick order of magnitude, right? Like, I own a 300,000 square foot suburban office building, in a core, market, Chicago, New York, LA, something like that, in the suburbs. And I'm all lit up with good connectivity at an LTE. How long would it take in a retrofit to get me set up, and approximately how much money, order of magnitude, would it take to get me set up and transitioned into 5G at the right time?
It depends on the solution that you have right now and when you installed it. Currently, if you were putting in a Self-I solution, a Quattro solution as an example, everything that we're selling right now, installing right now, is going to come 5G ready in terms of sub 6 gigahertz. For our product, and I think a lot of products, not just ours, but being reasonable and fair here, a lot of it's a software upgrade. And for our product, it really was just upgrading our software to actually, support not only the sub 6 gigahertz technology, but actually support the bands, right, that are supported by the existing hardware. And that's the other thing too, got to realize, just because this network rolls out doesn't mean that all of the hardware out there will support those bands as well. So we actually, I think, you could say that if you've got product that's been installed within the last year, maybe 2 years, a lot of it's going to be software upgradable and future ready. I think the problem's going to be with millimeter wave. And I just say that simply, maybe problem's not the right word here, but there's not any existing solutions hardware that I know of right now that are being deployed that actually will support millimeter wave, right? And it is a completely different animal. I don't know necessarily that it's going to be possible to accommodate that with software. That might require an add-on product. So it could add some additional costs to a current deployment. Got to be careful here, because I also don't want to plant the idea that you should wait and see, don't deploy anything and wait until everything's millimeter wave ready, because that could be a while yet. So I think, the rule of thumb for cellular remediation in the LTE environment is, generally speaking, if you can do a 300,000 square foot building and you can basically put in what we call a neutral host solution, which would be at one time 4 operators, now 3, right? You're talking
because of T-Mobile and
correct, T-Mobile and Sprint merger. And now all these bands are being refarmed and reappropriated here and there, so it's kind of hard to keep track of it. But let's say a 3-carrier solution for a 300,000 square foot building with installation, annual maintenance and support, if you could get that down under $1 per square, that's actually a pretty good rate, right? That's kind of the benchmark, so to speak, right? I think right now that's not going to change necessarily with 5G sub 6 gigahertz. With millimeter wave, you might be tacking on an extra 20 cents to that. It depends on what the solutions are going to look like. Again, you might have to go in and add a specific piece of hardware to your existing 3G, 4G LTE, and 5G DSS solution, and that's going to add a little additional cost. But I think for us, we pride ourselves in figuring out a way to put the solutions to market less expensively. And that's really all about our technology and our chipset and the ability to go in and install it much easier, much quicker with using category cable instead of coax. So we're constantly thinking about the total solution. When we build a product, we don't just look at our product costs to the integrator and therefore to the end customer. We look at the overall cost of what it's going to cost to get a total solution installed and to be able to support that over 3 to 4 or 5 years, right? So we're actually looking at that piece of it as well. So I'm going to say that we'll probably figure out a way to do it so that we'll stay in line with our core philosophy of having probably the most efficient product in the market at the fewest cents per square.
Yeah,
that's
really
what we're always going for.
One of my key takeaways from this, Timothy, is that in the short run, at least, these upgrades are going to be about software. And, we often joke that software is eating the world, right? And Chris and Tyler, your solutions are either entirely software or largely software based. Chris, you've got a mix of hardware and software in your world. Speaking of the future, talk to us about one really exciting feature in VergeSense's product roadmap. Your software is changing, it's evolving. You've got a ton of developers working on really cool solutions. Give us a preview of what the future VergeSense product looks like.
Sure, yeah. So what the sensors do and essentially how they work is that they're doing object detection, as we call it. And the objects that they're looking for are people, or representations of what we've trained them to believe are people, right? So in a lot of cases, it'll be mounted above. If it sees a head and shoulders outline, then we'll count that as a person. But one of the things we've been working on is something that we call signs of life. So we had many customers who are interested in not only detecting objects that are people, but can we detect objects that are people's personal belongings that they may leave behind in spaces. So right now, what we're doing is basically if there is a backpack or a jacket or a laptop, one of those three things in any space where you have the sensors installed, we can say, hey, there is a sign of life in that space. And what that does for a lot of our clients is it allows them to, one, better know how space is being used, not just physically by people standing there, but also passively in terms of people kind of hoarding space and claiming that space for the day. But it also allows a lot of organizations to help with their back to work and desk booking policies when they go and set this up, because one of the things that a lot of companies are doing when they return back to work is they're establishing a desk booking practice. So a lot of employees used to have an assigned seat, right? Maybe pre-COVID, you come into this seat, this is where you sit, same thing every day. Now it's, you can sit anywhere, maybe on this floor or in this building. You've just got to book the space on a mobile app like an HQO beforehand. But with that, companies also want to know, okay, did somebody actually show up? They're going to use the sensors for that. And if they don't show up, the space will be released back into the pool so someone else can come in and book that space. Well, same goes for if somebody is using that space for a period of time and then they get up and walk away, go to a meeting, go to the bathroom, or leave. We want a way to be able to release that desk back into the pool of desks so that someone else can use that asset. The problem you have when you set up those releases is that if somebody left their belongings there, you wouldn't necessarily want to release that space because their stuff is still there. Somebody should come around and clean it if their stuff has been there for quite a long time, or it should be put in a locker. So we're writing a lot of policies with those integrations around how can we make it so that each organization has their own configurable time period for when they release those desks. Additionally, so that all exists today, which is really a kind of a unique selling proposition for us. But I think the other thing we're working on is how can we take this sign of life and expand it, move beyond the backpacks, the laptops, and the jackets. Can we also detect plates of food or other objects that people are leaving behind so we know what type of interactions people are having in spaces. It would be valuable information for a lot of these organizations to know, hey, this conference room is used quite often by a large number of people, but what's going on in there? Is there actually a meeting that's being held? Maybe we can pull that from Outlook to tell us, yes, a meeting was booked and it looks like it's a board meeting, but 90% of the time are people eating in that room because we're detecting that there are plates of food. So there are a lot of interesting metrics that we're going to be able to grab with that object detection algorithm enhancement that we're doing here in the near future. So that's what we're most excited about, taking that data and bringing it up into the platform to give people some actionable insights that they can then go and take.
Amazing. Tyler, it sounds like Chris is going to be able to help me with my calorie counting when I'm eating in the office and making sure I'm sticking to the right types of food and eating at the right times, and flag for me when I'm just teasing. But that's a really cool feature, Chris. Tyler, what's the equivalent in HQO world? What's the product feature that you're most excited about for the software, in the near future?
I mean, not to completely jump on Chris's bandwagon, but I think data is really where we're all going, right? And I think what I'm most excited about is, earlier this year we launched a different version of our digital grid and our analytics tool. So we did a lot of market research with our landlords and our operators, and we really tried to understand, not just what data should we ingest, but what is the data we can ingest that they can make actionable to actually take into account with their ROI and how they start to make decisions. So on that same vein, we'll be launching later this year our V2 of the digital grid. So that will have some enhancements around the different amenities in those different assets and portfolios, and then all the different functional verticals. So pulling in more data through, work order and access controls and some different partnerships that we'll start to have live feeds into. So we have a lot of that now as we've broken it out to, a people area where how people are connected to the asset, the portfolio, actual space usage, and then also lastly, experience. So how people are experiencing both the physical and the digital. I think the young kids call it the phygital now. So really leaning into everything within the actual experience that a landlord brings to their tenant base. So I think we're just scratching the surface on where we're going to go. And really, I think that people who are moving now are going to be much further ahead as we look 1 year down the road coming out of COVID.
The phygital. I think we all the Gen Xers and Boomers, we're all taking something new out of this panel. Thank you for that, Tyler. I may quote you on that with attribution, of course, going forward. Well, it's been really interesting to hear about some of the cool new technologies that are bringing us back into this flexible return to work environment that we're all facing here. I want to give a special thanks to our panelists here for making the time to educate us, not just what's happening from the software and hardware perspective that's facing the occupiers and the landlords, but also the infrastructure, network, and connectivity. I'd like to thank Timothy Lewis from Nextivity for joining us and providing the perspectives on today and tomorrow. From HQO, Tyler Met, thank you very much for your time and effort in explaining the tenant engagement technologies. And for Chris Keene from VergeSense, the occupancy sensors and food identifiers, jackets and computers and backpacks too. Oh my, very, very cool to learn about how all of your businesses work and integrate with each other and rely upon each other increasingly, it sounds like, in this remote turning back into flexible work environment today. With that being said, I think we can probably wrap up our panel today. I want to thank you guys again for joining. Again, I'm Aaron Block from MetaProp, a prop tech VC firm. It's been a real pleasure to learn together, and we'll see you in the digital world sometime soon.